So there is a Japanese art form called kintsugi. Has anyone heard of kintsugi before? Raise your hand if you have. I figured most people had not. What happens in Japan, and it's kind of spread across the world, is when pottery will break, there's someone called a kintsugi master who will come and kind of stitch the pottery back together. But the unique thing about it is they don't use glue, they actually use a gold mixture. It's primarily made of gold flakes. And so here's a picture of a piece of kintsugi art. That bowl or whatever it was shattered, and they used this gold flake to kind of stitch it back together. Now, for most of us, we would be like, what a waste, right? Like if our pot breaks or a cup breaks, we would just take it and throw it away because, or a couple, maybe not, but many of us would, because glass cups are like, you can get them for free from a lot of different places. But the crazy thing is that after they do this, when they stitch it back together with gold, it is actually worth more value than before it was broken, which is crazy to think about. And so I was thinking about this in relation to God and in relation to our relationship with Him, and He often does the exact same thing. He allows us to be broken so that in order that when we are broken, we can be remade. God often, maybe not causes, I can't theologically wrap my head around that if He causes it or allows it, but He at least allows us to be broken so that in the process we can be remade. And in doing so, in the end, what ends up happening is we see God's glory even greater. And in the end, what happens is He makes us more and more like Him. And so we're going to see this today in John chapter 11, which is where we're going to be. If you want to start opening up there. In John chapter 11, this is going to be Jesus' last miracle documented outside of His resurrection in the book of John, or at least His last major miracle. John chapter 1 through John chapter 11, what it's trying to show us is that Jesus is the Messiah, that He came to save us from our sins, and that He has power and authority. And so John chapter 11 is His greatest miracle outside of His resurrection, and trying to show us that He is who He says He is. It is also personally my favorite story in the entire book of John, and one of my favorite stories in the entire Bible. So let's take a look at it. We're going to be in John chapter 11, starting in verse 1. So it says this: Now a certain man was ill, Lazarus of Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. It was Mary who anointed the Lord with ointment and wiped His feet with her hair, whose brother Lazarus was ill. So this is really odd. Jesus' friends, Mary, Martha, and Lazarus, are in Bethany, and their brother Lazarus gets sick. What's weird is in verse 2 where it says, Mary who anointed the Lord's feet with ointment and wiped his feet with her hair. This is weird because this hasn't happened yet in the book of John. This doesn't happen until John chapter 12. So as I'm reading through this, I'm like, why is John talking about this right now if it hasn't even happened yet? It wouldn't be to signify who Mary and Martha are, because we wouldn't know that as people who are reading through the book of John. And what hit me, what I realized is He's doing this because He's trying to show the love that Mary, Martha, and Lazarus has for Jesus, and vice versa, the love that Jesus has for Mary, Martha, and Lazarus. Right? We see this type of love because Mary is willing to wash Jesus' feet. Now, we've talked about this before. But to wash someone's feet back in that time period meant you had significant love or you were a servant for that person, right? Feet were nasty back then. Right now we wear shoes and we walk on roads of concrete and stuff like that. But back then they wore at most sandals. A lot of times they didn't wear shoes at all. And they walked on roads that were disgusting, that animals would walk on. And as horses and donkeys and those things walk, what happens? They poop, right? And so humans would walk into that, and their feet would be gross. So to wash someone's feet meant you either loved them or you were their servant. So it's trying to show us the love that these people have for each other. Jesus for Martha, Mary, and Lazarus, and Martha, Mary, and Lazarus for Jesus. That's the first theme we're going to see. We're going to see two major themes today. As you read through this, and as we go through this, try to spot the word love, because it's in here over and over and over. So someone who Jesus loves is sick. His name is Lazarus. And then we see here in verse 3, it says this: So the sisters sent to Him, being Jesus, saying, Lord, he who you love is ill. But when Jesus heard it, He said, This illness does not lead to death. It is for the glory of God, so that the Son of God might be glorified through it. So Jesus says, hey, this sickness that he has, it's not going to lead to his ultimate death. It will actually lead to his death. We'll see here in a minute. But it won't lead to his ultimate death. It's ultimately pointing to the glory of God. And that's the second thing we're going to see today. As we read through this text, look for how many times you see the word glory, and look for how many times you see the word love. That's what the author of John is trying to show us. The glory of God and the love that Jesus has, and vice versa. And so then it says that this is the most mind-boggling 2 verses in the entire Bible to me. It says this. Now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So when he heard that Lazarus was ill, he stayed 2 days longer in the place where he was. Now, if I know someone who is sick and I love them, I am going to go help them as soon as I can. If my wife or my parents or my sisters or a good friend, someone here, if you guys are sick and I have the antidote to help, because I love you, I am coming right to you, right? Like if I'm the only person who has the antidote for a snake bite that you have and I love you, I'm going right away. But Jesus, it says, because he loved them, he waited. Listen to this again, verse 5. Now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. Because when he heard that Lazarus was ill, he stayed 2 days longer in that place. So he waited there because he loved them. And that makes no sense to me as a person. When I love someone, I'm going to go help them right away. But here's what we see. His love is not focused on us feeling great all the time. His love is not just focused on our personal help. His love is focused on us seeing the glory of God. And so because he loved Mary, Martha, and Lazarus, he waited, and what ended up happening is Lazarus would die. Jesus' greatest concern for your life is not that you would feel happy and healthy. It's not that you would be wealthy, but that ultimately you would see who God is. That's his greatest concern for your life. Now, I'm not saying he doesn't want you to be happy, and I'm not saying he doesn't want you to be healthy, but more important than all that, because he loves you, what he wants you to see is the glory of God. And because he wanted Mary, Martha, and Lazarus to see the glory of God, he waited, and what ended up happening is Lazarus physically died. And so the next few verses 7 through 16, Jesus and the disciples start having a conversation. Jesus is like, the disciples are like, hey, you go to Judea, they're going to kill you. And which is true, they did end up killing him because he went to Judea. But he's like, I'm the light of the world, we'll be okay, everything's fine, just stick with me. I have more important things to do. So they wait a couple days, and then they go and see Lazarus, Mary, and Martha. And over that time period, Lazarus ends up dying. So now we're in verse 17, and it says this. Now when Jesus came, he found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb for 4 days. Bethany was near Jerusalem, about 2 miles off. And many of the Jews who had come to Martha and Mary to counsel them concerning their brother. So when Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went and met him. But Mary remained seated in the house. Martha said to Jesus, Lord, if you would have been here, my brother would not have died. And so he ends up going to see them and talking to Martha. And then to Martha, he says this. But even now, I know, or Martha says this to Jesus, but even now I know that whatever you ask from God, God will give you. Jesus said to her, your brother will rise again. Martha said to him, I know that he will rise again in the resurrection and on the last day. Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, though he die, yet he shall live. And everyone who lives and believes in me shall never die. Do you believe this? She said to him, yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God, who is coming into the world. So we see 2 major things here. The first thing is when talking to Martha, he says that I am the resurrection, I am the life. Listen to this. He doesn't say I have power to resurrect. He doesn't say that through me resurrection will happen. What he literally says is I am the resurrection. And so what Jesus, and the author of John, who is John himself, is trying to show us, is that we need to attach ourselves to Jesus. That we need to cling to Jesus because he is the one that not just brings resurrection, but he is resurrection.
That's right.
Some of us may not really care to get this deep, but this is really cool. And he says, everyone who lives and believes in me. This isn't, the word in there isn't actually in, it's into. So what he's really trying to show us here is that those who cling, those who hold on to me. There's a common misconception that we become Christians just simply by mental assent or by a word. Like we are good with God if we just believe that God is God. And we believe that Jesus is who he says he is, that he came to die for sin. But what Jesus is trying to do is trying to give us a deeper idea of what belief is. It's not just something that happens with our mouth. It's an idea of us attaching ourselves to Jesus.
Yep.
It's us holding on to Jesus. We're 100% saved by grace through faith. in Jesus alone. But that faith, what it does is it pushes us to attach ourselves to him and hold on to him. Even in our weakest moments where we're barely hanging on and barely attached, we're holding on to him. And so my concern is that with many people is that they simply think that they're good with God because they once prayed a prayer. And they think they're good with God because they believe that Jesus died for sin. But believing in Jesus is not just something that happens in your head, it's something that happens in your heart. And so the question we need to ask ourselves is not simply do we believe in Jesus, but have we attached ourselves to Jesus by faith? Not that he just can resurrect, but he is the resurrection, so we hold on to him. The second thing we see in this section here is how he approaches Martha. Look at the conversation that they have. He says, I am the resurrection. I am the life. Where does he go? He goes to theological truth when he's trying to confront Martha here and help her with the passing of his brother. Now let's see how Jesus talks to Mary. In verse 32 it says this. Now when Jesus came to where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet, saying to him, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come with her saw her weeping, he was moved deeply in the spirit and greatly troubled. What we see here when comforting Mary, what does he go to? He goes to her emotions. He goes to her heart. Instead of going to theological truth, it says that he had a deep emotional reaction. This idea of moved in the spirit, everywhere else translated in the Bible, is like this idea of anger almost. It's this idea of frustration. And so it's trying to show us how deeply Jesus was moved when he's seeing Mary crying. He approached Mary with emotion. And so some of us are more centered in the brain. Others of us are more centered in the heart. Some of us more centered with theology, with knowing things. Some of us more centered with our emotions. Yet Jesus relates to both of them in ways that they can understand. What we also see here, as we continue, is not only does Jesus relate with them, but he feels pain just like they did. In verse 38, it says this, Then Jesus, deeply moved again, came to the tomb. It was a cave and a stone laid against it. Jesus said, I went a little too far there. Sorry. Verse 34, And he said, Where have you laid him? They said to him, Lord, come and see. Jesus wept. So the Jews said, How he loved him. So the Jews see how he loved him. But some of them said, Could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man also have kept this man from dying? How does Jesus respond when Mary is crying and the people around him are crying? He responds, as many of us know, the shortest verse in the Bible, verse 35, Jesus wept, or Jesus cried. And so he responds with tears. This is something also that just really like confuses me, because Jesus knows that he's going to raise Lazarus from the grave, right? Like he knows he's going to raise his best friend to life. Yet he still has pain, and he's still hurting, and he still cries. And that's always just like, man, it's always been mind-boggling to me. What I think Jesus is not only trying to show us, because this is who he is, but what he's showing us is that it's okay to hurt when tragedy happens. It's okay to cry, and it's okay to be upset, and it's okay not to be okay. Jesus, literally the Son of God, who knows everything and knows that he's bringing Lazarus back to life, cries when this tragedy hits. And that's okay. We often feel like when tragedy hits that we have to be tough and we can't show our emotions. And we have to act like everything is okay. I've shared this story, not quite in the detail that I'm about to share, but a really good friend of mine, I was his best man at his wedding, and he was in my wedding. We're really good friends. We've been friends since junior high. He had a baby. He was having a baby, him and his wife. And a couple months in, they figured out that the baby had a very rare heart defect. And by rare, we mean like 1 in a couple million. 1 in like very, very rare. Only a handful happen in the United States each year. And so they figured it out. So they had a good plan of how to fix it, how to fix the heart defect. Basically, the blood wouldn't flow right when the baby was born. And so they had to dig out the heart a little bit, which sounds horrible, but dig out the ventricles in the heart to make the blood flow. And there's about a 50-50 chance of his baby surviving. And so the day of the birth comes around, and the baby comes out, and it goes into its first emergency surgery. And it comes through good. Everything is good after the first surgery. The second surgery is the key surgery, though, with it. And so it goes into the second surgery about a week later, and it actually goes well. It goes a lot longer than they were expecting, but the surgery goes very, very well. The baby did not have enough strength, they believe, to close up the chest at the time, And so they wanted to leave the chest open and wait a couple days till they closed it. And so I don't remember how long it was, a couple days to a week. They waited and they went to close the chest. It was supposed to be like a procedure that, in and out type deal. They were so not worried, and the doctors were so not worried about the surgery that my friend and his wife were even packing up some suitcase to run home real quick because they're in Indianapolis coming back to Fisher so they could get some more stuff and see their other kid real quick and then come on back. In the middle of that surgery, the baby's heart stops. They have to put it on ECMO, and over a week period, it ended up passing away. That was one of the hardest things to see when I went to that baby's funeral, just to see a little baby in a casket and just see the brokenness and the hurt and the pain that everyone was feeling. I don't know if I had ever prayed for anything and fasted for anything so much in my life as I had for that poor baby. And it completely tore me apart and obviously tore him apart. I met with him for the first time after that about 3-4 weeks ago, about a month ago now. And we were talking about what had happened, and he opened up and he just started crying. And the thing that he was most crying about was the fact that he doesn't feel like he can share his pain with anyone, because he has to be strong for his wife, and he has to be strong for his daughter, and he has to be strong for the family members around him. And as much as that sounds like a noble thing, the truth is that's not how God wants us to be. It's okay to be broken and hurting when you're broken and hurting. And you don't have to hold everything together, because he's the one who holds everything together. So many of us, when we have pain, what we do is we go into isolation. But that's not what Jesus does here. He doesn't act like he's a man who has to hold it all together when his best friend dies. He cries. And that's okay. And that is good. And that is right. We should be people who, when we are broken, not acting like we're holding the weight of the world on our shoulders and holding it all together, but bringing it to God. And whatever emotional response we have, that's good. Maybe you're not a crier, and that's okay. But you don't have to act like you have it all together. I get it too. Some of you are like, I'm introverted. Like, I don't like to share emotions, and I don't like to share things like that. And I am too. I 100% get it. I'm not saying you have to go up to everyone and be someone who is emotionally receptive with every person and have emotional conversations. But you do need to find a couple people that you can open up with, that you can have conversations like that with when you're hurting and broken. Obviously, it should be a spouse or something like that, but as well as a couple friends. I meet with a group of guys every other week, and we meet at 6:30 in the morning at Dunkin' Donuts. And every other week we talk about what's going good, what's going bad, and what kind of sin we have in our life. And we just open up our lives to each other. And so I'm not saying you have to find, you have to, like I say, be emotionally vulnerable to every person that you know. But you do need to find some people that you can open up with and be like, hey, I'm not okay right now. Or, hey, I got this in my life. We see Jesus here give us that example. And so Jesus cries, and he's hurting, even though he knows he's about to raise Lazarus from the dead. And then it says this, where I jumped ahead earlier. Then Jesus, deeply moved again, came to the tomb. It was a cave, and a stone laid against it. Jesus said, take the stone away. Martha, the sister of the dead man, said to him, Lord, by this time there will be an odor, for he has been dead for 4 days. Jesus said to her, did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God? So they took away the stone. So Jesus says, hey, move the stone. Martha is like, hey, you know that he's been dead for a while. Like, now when people die, we make them look all pretty and make them smell good. But if you just let a body lay, what happens is everything that's in it comes out, and it looks very lifeless and gross and disgusting. And so Martha's like, don't remove the tomb, don't remove the stone, because it's going to stink. And Jesus is basically like, hey, believe me, believe what? You're going to see the glory of God. And so Martha, and I assume Mary, command them to move the stone. This is cool here. We often think that God demands perfect belief out of us, and he doesn't. We see that Martha, and probably even Mary here, is doubting that Jesus is going to do anything. They just think that it's going to stink. What we see here is that God doesn't expect perfect belief, but he wants obedience from us. And it's often when we lack belief that we step up and are obedient, and God works. It's like the idea of, God, help my unbelief. I believe, but help my unbelief. And so what ends up happening when they move the stone? And Jesus lifted his eyes and said, Father, I thank you that you heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I said this on account of the people standing around me, that they may believe that you sent me. When he had said these things, he cried out with a loud voice, Lazarus, come out. And the man who had died came out, his hands and his feet bound with linen strips and his face wrapped in cloth. Jesus said to them, unbind him and let him go. And so what ends up happening, he brings Lazarus back from the dead. Lazarus rise from the grave, which is beautiful. And we often stop at the story here. But here's the main point. The main points of the story, as you see, as we read through that, if you read through the whole text, you'd see love and glory over and over and over and over. What we see here, if we read to verse 45, we see the real point that John is trying to make here. If you think about it, like if this happened in the 21st century, here's what we would do with Lazarus. We would take him and we would make him write a book about what he's seen when he died. And it'd become a bestseller, and we would make a movie out of it. But John here is not pointing to Lazarus. He doesn't give us any indication of what Lazarus seen when he died. Here's the point he's trying to make in verse 45. Many of the Jews, therefore, who had came with Mary and had seen what he did, believed in him. The point that John is trying to make, and Jesus is trying to make through this, is that through the trial that they went through, that they seen the glory of God and they believed. Because of the love that Jesus had for his people, for Lazarus, Mary, and Martha, because of that love, he brought Lazarus from the grave, and God received glory and people believed. And I love that. That's so cool. No mention of what Lazarus seen when he died. No book deal, no movie, but we see that people believed, which is awesome. All right, so 4 quick applications will be done, and we kind of touched all these applications as we went through already. The first application is this. God has not abandoned you in your trial, but is using it to make you more like him. Is using it so that you would see his glory and make you more like him. One more time, God has not abandoned you in your trial, but he is using it so that you may see his glory and that you may become more like him. I think one really good illustration would we cap this off. There's a pastor named Tim Keller who lives in New York, and he talks about a pup tent. If you guys know what a pup tent is, it's like a little tent with some a lot of times they'll have like netting on the side so little bugs and stuff can't get in. He says, if you go up to that pup tent and you walk around that pup tent, and I tell you, can you see if there's a Great Dane in there? You will with 100% clarity be able to see the Great Dane in there. However, if I tell you to go up to that pup tent, walk all around it, and look for a little bug called a no-see-em. Now, we don't have those around here, but on the East Coast, they're very prevalent. They live by water. It's a bug that's so small that you can't see it with the naked eye. However, you can often feel it when it bites you, but you can't see it. Now, if I tell you walk up to that same tent, walk all the way around that tent, and tell me, hey, do you see a no-see-em? You're not going to be able with clarity to answer that question for me because you can't see it. But just because you don't see it doesn't mean it's not there. And the same is true with our trial and our tragedy and our pain that we're going through. Just because you don't see a purpose, just because you don't see a reason, doesn't mean that there's a reason not there. And that reason is certainly not that because God doesn't love you. It's actually because he loves you, and he's using that so that you would see his glory. So God has not abandoned you in your trial. Second application point, Jesus connects to us in different ways. We see this with Mary and Martha, right? With Mary, he's more emotional, and he connects emotionally. But with Martha, he connects with the brain, more theologically. And so all of us are made in different ways, and God has wired us all in different ways. And that's actually for good, doesn't it? But God connects to us because we're wired different in different ways. I can think of numerous people in my life, if they went through a tragedy, I'd connect with them through emotional type things. And others, like if Austin were to go through a tragedy, I would try to connect to him more theologically or through the brain. And Jesus does the same thing with us. He relates to you where you're at.
That's right.
Third thing is this, is it's okay to hurt in trial.
Yeah.
As we talked about, if you're going through trial, you're going through pain, you're going through tragedy, it's okay to feel the pain of that. Jesus very much does. One guy who is like a hero to most modern day pastors and Christians is a guy named C.S. Lewis. He wrote a lot of books and he's quoted oftentimes from the pulpit. But not many people have quoted this before. C.S. Lewis, after his wife died of cancer, said this. He said, when we are happy and turn to God with gratitude and praise, it feels like we are welcomed with open arms. However, come to him when your need is desperate and all other help is vain. And what do you find? A door slammed in your face. And after that, silence. That's how C.S. Lewis was feeling in that moment after he lost his wife. Some guy who was like a hero of the faith and has written tons of Christian books. Yet he feels like God left him in his darkest moment. That truth isn't true. The feeling may be true, but the feeling may be true, but the truth behind it is not. You may feel forgotten, but that's not actually true. Yet it's okay to not feel okay. In the same way that C.S. Lewis is like, man, I feel like God's not there after my wife died of cancer. It's okay for us to feel that way sometimes. And in doing that, we can figure out that, hey, God is actually with us.
That's right.
In those moments where we feel those things, we can have conversations with God and conversations with the people around us and point us to the fact that, hey, God is with us. And it's okay to feel that way. God is going to work through that.
Amen.
The fourth thing is this. God is looking for obedience, or I worded it differently up here. God is not looking for perfect faith, but obedience.
That's right.
We see with Mary and Martha, like, they didn't know what Jesus was doing, probably. They were a little lost. They believed that the resurrection was something that happened after God came back. But what Jesus was doing here is he was going to bring Lazarus back to life. And they were obedient. They removed the stone. They had conversations with him. They didn't have perfect faith, but they had obedience. As I talked about earlier, it's like the prayer, Lord, I believe, but help my unbelief. And so as we start walking in obedience, what often happens is our heart follows with that. Like when we obey God, and our heart may not be into it, as we start to follow, our heart becomes more receptive to those things. So 4 applications. God has not abandoned you in your trial. Jesus connects to us in different ways. It's okay to hurt in the trial. And God is not looking for perfect faith, but obedience.
Yes.
As I said, my favorite story in the book of John, favorite true story in the book of John, and one of my favorite stories overall in the Bible. I love it.